There are lots of advertising slogans around, aren't there? Maybe you can think of some immediately. Well, here's one or two. Just do it. That's Nike. Or I'm loving it. McDonald's. Or the happiest place on earth. Disneyland. Or the one that Jesus offers. Die with me. Wow. Well, we'll look at what that means for us in a moment. The pathway for Jesus on earth was never going to be an easy one. In the desert, he was tempted to look at spectacular and headlining ways of being the Messiah, but he rejected those. He chose the way of the suffering servant king. Here in this passage that we've just heard, we have an indication again of how hard this will be for Jesus. First of all, Jesus speaks about his own death. He will have opposition, and sadly that opposition comes from religious leaders who are supposed to be close to God's purposes. He'll be rejected by the leaders, we're told in verse 31. The Greek word for that, which is quite a long one, is apodokimastenai, which means literally failing to pass scrutiny. I guess that's still what people do with Jesus. They look at him and they decide, well, he's just an ordinary person, isn't he? But the irony is that if God measures us, that we do not pass scrutiny because of the sin that besets us. But the opposition also comes very painfully from within his own circle as well. Peter listens to what Jesus says, and Peter, thinking he's being helpful, rebukes Jesus. A bit cheeky to start with, if you ask me. But Peter still really hasn't quite got hold of how this Messiah thing is going to work with Jesus. And Jesus realizes that Peter has become a vehicle for Satan to tempt him once again. And so Peter is in turn rebuked. Get behind me, Satan, Jesus said. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Oh, that must have been so painful. But opposition to God can come in many ways, and it can be a reality in our own Christian lives, can't it? Sometimes that opposition comes from the flesh, almost our own selves fighting against Jesus. Sometimes that opposition comes from the world and worldly ways. We're told not to conform to the world and its ways and its standards, but sometimes that's where opposition comes from. Sometimes from the devil, so spiritual forces that are raged against us as well. Even more painful is when it comes from those who have responsibility for discerning God's work or from within our inner circles. Of course, there would come a time when Peter would deny his connection with Jesus and when Jesus will be betrayed by another of his circle. What pain there is in all of this. And of course, there will be the physical side with scourging and crucifixion. Jesus speaks of his death. But secondly, Jesus speaks of the death of his followers. Or more properly, I might say how his followers cannot be his followers unless they die. Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Now, Jesus isn't talking here about everyone having to be physically put to death, although that was a consequence and still is a consequence for some people that follow Jesus. He's actually going much deeper than that. Sometimes we want discipleship of Jesus, we want to follow him, but not at personal cost. But you can't have your cake and eat it. Earlier forms of that saying had the order changed, which makes its meaning clearer. It was said, you can't eat your cake and have it. That does make it clearer, doesn't it? If you want the cake, you can't eat it. If you want to be a disciple of Jesus, you can't be a disciple and still have your old life. Years and years and years ago, there was a credit card called an Access card. Some of you will remember it. It had an advertising slogan which was used, and the advertising slogan was, your flexible friend. I wonder if one temptation for us is to treat discipleship as our flexible friend, there when it's needed, ready to be pulled out of our wallet or purse when we want, useful for all manner of things, but more about when we have need. But of course, discipleship is 24/7. It's what defines us. Our identity is found in Christ, and it's not a hobby or an interest we pick up and put down as we feel inclined. Some of us have trouble saying no, and this extends to saying no to ourselves sometimes. Sacrifice and denial are an uncomfortable and challenging part of the Christian life. Lent, discipleship must be more than giving up chocolate so we have even greater delight from our Easter eggs on Easter Day. It should be about choosing Jesus over whatever else gets in the way. I choose Jesus over the next job offer because it causes me issues of being able to worship with others. I choose Jesus over the new car because it means I won't be able to give sacrificially for God's work. I choose Jesus over the hobby I've taken up because it's taken me away from focusing on Jesus. I choose Jesus over the books I've been reading because they create an unwholeness within. I choose Jesus over the Christian group I'm in because God is calling me to something new and I'm too comfortable with where I am. Those are just some examples. These areas, of course, will not always be challenges to us, but there will be areas in all of our lives, things, pressures, temptations, and then we are called upon to say, I choose Jesus over whatever it is. Trying to hang on to those things which get in the way of Jesus means we can't easily be disciples. It is that killer slogan from Jesus, die with me. What good is it, verse 36 and 7, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? And being a follower of Jesus means there will be times when we meet opposition as well. Jesus did, we will. Then, generally, we need to step up and acknowledge who Jesus is in our lives. That can be hard, can't it? But Jesus is quite forthright because you can't really be half a disciple. We will all fall down, of course. We will all fail. But our intention should be to give ourselves completely to Jesus. Verse 38, Jesus says, if anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Whether it's opposition or shyness or unsureness about how to talk about Jesus, it's important, I suggest, that we seek to grow in these things because Jesus is quite firm here. He expects us to be unashamed of him, just as he is unashamed of us. There was a campaign, it's still going, in fact, a number of years ago, called Not Ashamed. It was partly a reaction to Christians that were disciplined for showing that they were Christians, for instance, in the workplace. The strapline for Not Ashamed is visible and vocal for Jesus. I had a wristband with Not Ashamed on it. And you can still look them up on the internet and find out about that campaign. It might have some help and support which could be drawn on for our own situations. This is all hard stuff, isn't it? Die with me. But, all of this is the entry point to life. It is as Jesus dies that something happens in the spiritual realm that enables sin to be dealt with and for us to come into relationship with God again should we respond to his love. This means life in a new, exciting way. Not easy, not without challenges, not always comfortable, but with help for the hard bits, strength for the challenges, and if not comfortable, then comforted by the divine. When Jesus said, I have come to give you life in all its fullness, in John 10:10, we see that although the way of discipleship involves taking up a cross and letting go of our human nature, it is because Jesus wants us to experience true life as God intended in communion with him and others. And that being drawn into communion, fellowship with others, reminds us that when we ask what we need to die to in order to follow Jesus, we also ask that same question in terms of us being a group together. What is it we need to let go of sometimes because it gets in the way of following Jesus? Where do we need to die in our own lives in order that we might enter into life? Where do we need to die in our life, our corporate life with others, in order that we might enter into life? Enter into life now in all its fullness and life eternal as well. Jesus offered up his life for us. Will we offer up our life for him?